think there's an interesting correspondence or correlation between some of the ideas present in non-duality, the shusness of William James, or the Advaita, or the divine union, or whatever those terms may be, in which the sense of the ego is dissolved or suppressed or eradicated. Between that idea and the ideals and ambitions of scientific empiricism. I'm not sure if I can get to it with this, but one of the things I'm thinking about is in relation to the visual sense, and how, well, for example, Rumi, the Persian mystic, at one point, I think, in his writing, in kind of laying out how one might achieve some kind of enlightened state of non-duality, says, become seeing, 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 become seeing, which seems to me to be, in relation to other kinds of understandings of non-duality, seems to be a call to, well, two things actually. One thing, it's a kind of a call to dissolve the subject-object distinction into a focus upon the relationship, or upon the space between, or upon the circumstances by which subjects and objects resolve themselves. So the singular act of seeing, which connects a subject to an object, is also the kind of universal solvent which dissolves that apparent binary. So on the one hand, it seems to be a call to that. And I think, again, William James talks about this. He's talking about, I think he says something like, it's a shame we don't say it thinks rather than I think, in the same way that we say it's raining rather than any particular subject or any particular object is doing the raining. It uses the verb as the, or the activity itself as a centre of attention, if you like. It's not quite right, but it has that kind of, it orients itself around the verb, the action of raining or thinking or seeing, rather than the subject and object. So on the one hand there's that in Rumi. I think also it's an indication of what kind of a sense is perhaps useful for that. He doesn't say become feeling or become hearing, although I know other writers have made sort of suggestions in those areas. Become seeing, which certainly in a purely neurophysiological way occupies large parts of the brain, so you are mobilizing enormous amounts of resources if you're trying to do that. But also there's something quite non-threatening and ephemeral and detached about seeing, which there isn't in other modes of sense either. So when we see something, it remains as simply a sight. It doesn't press against the skin. It is literally detached. So it's not necessarily activating kind of defense mechanisms, or it's not activating other kinds of cognition which might make that kind of that kind of relationship clear, I suppose. So there's something about seeing which is very particular, I think, in that way. So when Rumi is saying become seeing, just to reiterate, if I can get this right, what I think he's kind of drawing our attention to is firstly a means to dissolve subject-object binaries by focusing on the action, and secondly by drawing attention to what kind of a sensory mode is perhaps most conducive to, in a metaphorical sense perhaps, in that quest. How this relates to scientific empiricism, I mean, certainly all of the spiritual overtones and metaphysical overtones are absent, but there often is the same kind of injunction. Certainly there is this tendency within science to try to move engagements with data towards a kind of visual engagement. And I think that's true even when it's working in the realm of pure mathematics. There's a kind of visual narrative being played out on the page or on the screen when equations are being worked through. And certainly sense data that appears, for example, on the surface of the skin, measurable, let's just say as, galvanic skin responses, only becomes available to scientific appreciation when that skin response, that felt sense, if you like, is translated into the visual senses of flickers on a screen or numbers in a chart. So again, there's a kind of move toward the visual. And there's an implicit move toward the visual in the whole notion of scientific detachment, which features an awful lot in those discourses, the idea that scientists and anybody seeking any kind of objective empirical engagement with truth has to kind of step back or gain a perspective or gain an overview or has to be kind of distanced in that way. And that distance is the distance of seeing. It's not so close that you can get a purchase on it or grasp it or internalize it or taste it, certainly. It's the distance that allows one to see it. And in that, the ideal seeing isn't viewpointed, it's the view from everywhere, or the view from nowhere, as Thomas Nagel puts it. So again, you have this becoming seeing, but it's the all-seeing everywhere-ness of Nagel. So again, I think you have that kind of parallel between Rumi's notion of becoming seeing as a means of gaining, in that case, a kind of spiritual union and the insight that comes from spiritual union, and in the aims of scientific empiricism, it's the enshrinement of detachment, the action of detachment and the vision that comes from that detachment, and a focus on that as a means of deriving method, which also smacks of that becoming seeing. In order to become a good scientist, we must become seeing, and the seeing is not from a particular place, and it's not. And the focus is never on oneself or the object, it's about the relationships, and that's where the data lies. I'm not sure if I've really captured what I'm after there, but I think there's some kind of parallel or some kind of relationship between those ideas.